keeping you up to date with the latest in Texas Tech sports. This is the Ask Level podcast, brought to you by Double T 97.3.
Welcome in, Ask Level episode 10, powered by Double T 97.3, alongside Chris Level. I'm Chois Woodman. We are here after what I'd call probably the most disappointing game we've seen this season for the Texas Tech Red Raiders. They get walloped by the Baylor Bears at home. Level, thoughts?
Yeah, in many ways, Choice, I think it was kind of, worst case scenario in that, hey, look, there was no devastating injuries or anything like that, but the result was somewhat lopsided. I think you were outmatched. I think that was frustrating. I think we talked about these kinds of games. It builds to this. You have a night game, you have a monster crowd, you have a lot going on, and you just can't quite deliver. And that's seemingly been Texas Tech's issue for the last decade. You just can't get the over the hump type result that you're looking for. Because I think if you win that game against Baylor, you're set up for a very meaningful, competitive end of the season, and you're in the conference race. Sure. And now you look at it, and now you're basically going to scratch and claw to try to get to a bowl game. So you've got 4 opportunities left, and you've got to win at least 2 of them, and that's just to be 500 in the year. But you're trying to get over the hump as far as the conference record and all those things, and it just. Yeah, Baylor was just better than you were. They've got really good big people, and we said this on the broadcast, but Joey's talked about that all the time, man. Big people beat up little people, and that happened repeatedly against the Bears, and it was frustrating. And also, I say this worst case scenario to you as well, in that you kind of feel a sense of, and people may disagree with this, and they're going to have their own opinion, and that's the beauty of this kind of stuff, but you kind of have a sense of, okay, what do you do now at quarterback? What exactly, what do you do now? And I don't know if there's a no-brainer answer because 11 of 34 and 3 interceptions, and we can take issue with the offensive line. We could take issue with a drop and this and that, but I think we would all agree Baron Morton didn't play very well. And there's a lot around him that didn't play well either, but I don't know if he's just like the clear-cut starter this week. They're going to have to, in the next, early this week, they'll have to decide what is best there and roll with it. But so I guess that's an opening statement. So with that choice, I'll take questions. No, I'm kidding.
We'll take questions for the group. I think, I agree with a lot of what you said, Level. It just felt like, though, the game as a whole on Saturday night against Baylor, it was flat. I mean, you had, as you mentioned, drops from the receiver. Your worst, at least pass blocking wise, your worst night of the season from your offensive line, where it felt like there was no time. 80% of the time, quarterback's dropping back. He is bull rushed almost immediately, where he's getting sacked or having to move around very quickly. And then when we see Morton flushed from the pocket, for the most part, flushed from the pocket, he's been fairly accurate on the run, throwing on the run this year, and he just wasn't a lot of the time. It was just, I think.
And there were times too where he held on to it way too long.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean it was just a kind of collective, and you know what, Baylor had a lot to do with that. Yeah, because when you're able to, which they did most of the night, when you're able to create the kind of pass rush they did with just 4 people, it's a problem. And that way you can start to use some bells and whistles on the back end and really what coaches would say, cloud the picture. Yeah. But when there's, when they're not having to pressure and blitz because they're so good up front, because I mean that's a legit front, man. I mean they're and again broken record this year, but it just seems like this is the year where, man, there's a ton of old and experienced defensive linemen, And this is why they were picked to win the league, man. Is that group and that group on the offensive line. And I thought they kind of worked you over a little bit too.
Yeah, you lost the battle in the trenches. That's where it started last night for me, or Saturday night. You just unable to respond to them bullying you on the offensive and defensive line. And I think that's where the game to me was just so frustrating. You haven't really had one of these. I think there's a strong argument that the three teams before the Baylor game that beat you were better teams, better football teams than you as a whole. I didn't think that was the case necessarily on Saturday night. You just got outplayed. I'm not saying Baylor's not a better football team but it seemed like in every facet they outplayed you on Saturday night, and you never really got to compare yourself in the game. Even when you were in it at moments, it felt like you're kind of out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I point back to there was a lot of expectations on that Baylor team. They have not put it together, but it looked to me like it's a team finally putting it together. They clearly played their best game against you. I think that's the frustrating part from a tech standpoint is you had played your best game a week ago and you thought, okay, more to come.
Right.
But now you've taken a step back. And I think this is the first time this season and through 8 games, which is crazy to say that you've already played 8 games, but that you feel like, didn't show up or weren't competitive. And it was at some point when it was, 24-17.
Right.
But you never felt like you could get over the hump. And because when they got up 17-3, the game was played the way they wanted to play it from there on out. And I don't care who you're playing or where the game is, if it's in the summertime or if it's in middle of October, you can't turn the ball over 5 times and expect to win in this league. It's just not going to happen.
No.
And especially when some of those equal points.
Yeah.
And it's just, you had a ball wrestled away from you in the end zone. Donovan Smith throws a good one to Loic Fungee. You dropped that one. I mean, Baylor made those plays. You did not. And so that's the part that is frustrating. It's a collective. I'm sure, Joey will take a lot of blame and Zach Kitley will take a lot of blame. Tim DeRuyter will take a lot of blame, but
sure,
it just was a kind of a collective loss. I mean, that last week versus West Virginia, there wasn't one aspect of the game or your team that you felt bad about. Like, man, this was good. This was good. This was good. This was good. I mean, just keep going. Against Baylor, you really sense that there's not much that you point to and go, this was bad. This was bad. This was, I mean, it was just like, it's the same list, but it's all like the arrow pointing down.
Right. These games are inverse of each
other.
Correct.
I mean, they're total opposites. And it's just frustrating because this was a 2-game stretch at home where I think you had a chance to get over the hump. But like I said, this is kind of who you are, I guess is what we're seeing. You kind of hope that you were trending up and that this was going to be a team that would continue to improve, but you've taken a step back here. And I think we'll learn a lot about this team this week going to Fort Worth and all that. You'll be expected to lose. Vegas is going to, favor that. And that's one of the hottest teams in the country. And they're very fast and explosive. And it's kind of a scary matchup for you, but you'll learn a lot about where this thing is headed, I think, based on how you play, this next week.
One more quarterback question, then we'll get on to TCU and some big news for the Big 12 Conference as well. So you mentioned you don't really know what that looks like this week. Do you go with Barron? Do you split things up? How does it look? But, and this may not be fair because the sample size was so small and these guys are coming in there cold, but as rough as Barron's numbers were and as rough as he played at times, the frustrating part is when you saw the other 2 guys in, they didn't really do anything to say,
I agree. That's
we need to have that job.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if there's not a no-brainer answer there. That's the frustrating part. Yeah. There, and without seeing, looking at it through a coach's eyes and all that, I don't know who's responsible for what, who busted what, where's the judgment on some of this stuff to how you kind of decide it. But you're right. I think I'm guessing it'll be between Barron and Tyler. I don't know if Tyler really got a fair shake, but his first pass is just that gives you major pause because he just telegraphed it and threw it right to a DB from Baylor that just walked into the end zone, and that's when the party was over. But I don't know what you do, and I'm guessing it'll be kind of a situation where somebody's going to get the start, but there's still going to be stuff built in for Donovan Smith. Yeah. I think they're not going to go away from that. And I think he made a mistake last night, but he also had a few plays that were pretty good too. So
yeah, and honestly, I mean, he should have had a touchdown pass too, a ball that wasn't hauled in that should have been by Fungi. He kind of looked like Fungi kind of let up after he thought he made the catch because the Baylor player kept playing through it. So it's just frustrating game all the way through. As great as you had last Saturday against West Virginia, as much fun as that one was, this one was just a big old dud against Baylor. And of course, it doesn't get any easier as you get to go play against an undefeated TCU team, which has been such an interesting case study this year, in my opinion, Chris. It's been a team that has just found a way to win games, just found a way. They've had some fortune by getting quarterbacks out of games, by facing a lot of second string guys, but also they have looked as good as anybody in the conference on the offensive side of the football. And I don't know if the season ended today, is Max Duggan your first team All Big 12 quarterback?
Without a doubt. Yeah, I don't think there's
that's what I would say.
Yeah, and guess what? I mean, the first team wideout. I think their offensive line is really good. And if Kendre Miller is not the first team running back, he's probably on the All Big 12 team.
Sure.
I mean, that's what, and the problem is they have Tay Barber. They've got, there's several weapons that they've got. They've got a tight end that transferred from University of Texas that they've started to find in recent weeks. They're extremely explosive. When I see TCU, they can show up with their B game and they've still been able to win because their team speed is such that they overcome a lot of deficiencies because you're watching against West Virginia, and West Virginia is giving them their best shot. And TCU starts to withstand it, but then it's just hand off Kendre Miller up the middle for 40 yards touchdown. Mm-hmm. It's Quentin Johnson running wide open 40 yards downfield touchdown. And then it's all these drives you've put together and you feel like, oh man, you're really getting it going. And TCU just erases it just like that. So that's the scary part about TCU. Their defense is not very good. They are having to outscore some folks. But they have also, I think, only given up on average of about 7 to 9 points in the second half of this last stretch of games. So they are getting better as the game goes along. But yeah, no, and you have some good moments in Fort Worth, but you also have some PTSD to where they've run out of fireworks at times because they've scored 82 on you too, and those were teams that kind of shut it down. I don't think that your team will, but I'm just curious what it looks like, because you need to scratch and claw, and you need to roll your sleeves up and turn this into a fight, man, because it's not going to be easy. And again, you could still play well and lose. That's the scary part about the way this TCU team is built. And now they're really confident. They've got 4 games left, and they've got 2 road trips. They're going to host the Red Raiders, but then they've got 2 road trips, one to Austin and then one to Waco in back-to-back weeks. And that's those are the 2 landmines for them. I'm sure that most people are going to look at the Tech game and go, okay, chalk that up. And you just only hope their players kind of buy into that as well, because going to Waco or going to Austin, neither one of those are going to be easy for this TCU team. But yeah, I just see team speed as the biggest problem for the Red Raiders this week, and then kind of consistency on offense, because I think there's a lot of things that you look at and you like about your offense, but then there's at times where you just, and again, it's kind of an average to above average group across the board. You don't have any bad players or any, but I think your offensive line is overmatched at times. I think in this game, they won't necessarily go up against one of the better defensive fronts. And so maybe that's a positive, but I like the 11 a.m. kick too, Choice.
Agreed.
But I don't really know what to expect.
I think I don't know. I've compared this TCU team level to, you remember that OSU team that I think is 2015 or so, somewhere in there, where they just kept finding a way to win. I think they got to 10-0, and then they, hit a wall the last couple of games. I think finished 10-2, lost Bedlam, all of that. This feels like a similar TCU team. I may be completely wrong on that, but it doesn't feel like this is a undefeated team that's capable of playing in a college football playoff. It feels like it's a team that's found a way to win games, that is beatable. They've shown that in so many games, but they haven't been beat. So I'm not saying the Red Raiders are going to be the first one on Saturday, but I'm also saying it's a possibility. If you play and Texas Tech brings their A game, plays much closer to the West Virginia game than they do the Baylor game, then it does feel like this is a team that you can play with for sure.
Oh, yeah. I don't expect TCU to roll into Arlington undefeated. I don't think that is going to be the case at all. But, at some point they deserve all the credit that they get.
Of course,
because this is a brutal league, and they could have showed up in Morgantown sleepy, and it's a hard place to play, and they end up winning by double digits. So it's just – so again, I just think their margin for error is bigger than most, just because of how many playmakers and the juice that they've got on offense. And Garrett Riley, to his credit, has done an incredible job with that offense. They are, because it's a scheme as much as it is players. And I think he's putting those guys in a really good position to, and again, you kind of get lucky with the whole Max Duggan thing.
Sure.
Because Chandler Morris wins that job out of camp. And he goes down, and then Max Duggan took the baton and was like, "Man, I'm not giving this back at all." And it's, and that story's been, talked about quite a bit. But I'm more concerned with what's going on in Lubbock and seeing how the Red Raiders respond and kind of what you do there and how much fight you've got in you. And I mean, because you heard this, but that's one of the things that I talked to Joey about after the game. Like you're going to learn a lot about your team this week, aren't you? And he's like, right. Oh yeah, yes, we will. And so he looked in the mirror, and he's going to challenge his staff and his players, and we'll see kind of what we get.
So to wrap up TCU here, if you were to place or predict what type of game this would be, you're expecting a blowout, you expecting a shootout, low scoring game? What would you anticipate we see on Saturday?
It'll be much closer to a shootout than not. Yeah, there'll be some points scored for sure. Because I think that's TCU's strength, and I think that's also TCU's weakness is their defense. And so I would expect the Red Raiders to score some points and all that. It's just, but again, also against TCU, no lead is safe. They have weathered many a storm in recent weeks with being down and all that, and then they just erase it just like that. So no lead will be safe, but yeah, it'll be a fun. For Joey's standpoint, it's probably a good thing that you have such a high profile team that's ranked and the team leading the league, week right after. That, because it's going to be nationally televised, and he's not going to have a hard time getting his kids' attention after the way that they played and the way that maybe that they all felt like they coached and all those things. So that part will certainly be interesting, but won't be easy, my man.
Yeah. The numbers would back up a shootout. I think TCU games have gone with the over in almost every game in Big 12 plays so far. So there have been some points scored for and against TCU. Mm-hmm. So switching gears a little bit here before we take a couple of questions and wrap it up. Some big news for the Big 12 in terms of TV contracts. I'll let you kind of break it down for us and tell us what this means for the league. Yeah,
well, the Big 12 has being widely reported that they have reached an agreement, a 6-year contract with ESPN and Fox that will allow their first and second tier rights to remain on those networks. And you actually didn't go down, you went up. Mm-hmm. And I think Big 12 athletic directors, when all is said and done, are expecting, north of $50 million per school. And again, that's way off from what the SEC and the Big 10 are going to get. But really what people are kind of trying to chop up now is how much better that's going to be than the Pac-12. And if the Pac-12 would can they beat it? Can they, but the dynamics for the Big 12 fan, which is really all that matters, because now you remain competitive. You've established some security with your league. There's no concern about your league folding up or your league getting poached, I don't think, because I don't think the Big 10 or the SEC are going to make any phone calls to anybody in your league, and that would be the only concern that you would have about anybody leaving, because you're making more money than or as much as everybody else. But now your games will remain on normal television for the common fan. There's going to be some streaming component like ESPN Plus, which is what people have kind of had to get used to.
Sure.
But I think Brett Yormark was not necessarily a fan of the Apple and the Amazon component, regardless of the money, because he doesn't want Big 12 fans to have to really search really hard for its content.
Right. It alienates it a little bit. Yeah.
A little bit, or you just don't have as big of a, as big of a platform in that sense. But this is seen to be really good news. Big 12 athletic directors are excited about it. And I think that the price, Brett Yormark basically did everything that he said he would do.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty brash and transparent about it in recent weeks at Big 12 media days there in Kansas City, as far as the basketball part. And I think people were like, okay, this guy looks like the cat that ate the canary, and he sure is talking a lot, but what do we ultimately get? And you got it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it ultimately means. I don't know if that means that the Pac-12 is done, or if the Pac-12 is going to get a deal that eclipses yours. But I think you're very happy with what you were able to establish, because the numbers you'll see, Choice, are about 31 per school for first and second tier rights. However, this doesn't factor in your third tier rights. It doesn't factor in NCAA tournament TV money.
Sure.
And it also doesn't factor in college football playoff money. And that money will actually go up when it does expand.
Yes.
But all that money is going to be shared with these leagues. And so, and the main thing from a fan standpoint is you are going to see some basketball games now on Fox and FS1. Okay. That is a change from the previous deal, but this deal won't actually start until 2025. This is a brand new agreement that will begin in 25. It will go to 2031. And that's about as good as I can do, is trying to sum it up.
Well, and one part of this Level is that it sounds like, at least per reports, that there are escalators built in too. If you do happen to add teams from the Pac-12 or anything like that, then that was the big concern back in the last round of realignment is, crud, we've got to split up the pie, and it didn't make sense necessarily to add these teams, because then we're losing money by adding teams. But it seems like there's going to be escalators built in where you basically just give the new school the same amount that the other teams are getting.
Well, and I think the money goes up.
Goes even more.
I believe that. Okay. And here's something to pay attention to. ESPN has actually written that into their agreement, whereas I believe Fox has actually just verbally said, "Sure, we'll do that," but it's not. It's not on paper. In language in the contract, and so I think that is why Brett Yormark only wants to see this as a 6-year deal, because you can get to the table quicker than the next time that the SEC and the ACC renegotiate. And by that time, if you do have new members, you can say, hey, look, now this is what we've got. So there's all kinds of chess being played here, and kind of playing the short term, playing the long term. But bottom line is you've got some security now, and you are well funded. And what this means to the common fan is that you can now still afford to pay your coaches these salaries that are just continually going up. You can potentially operate in the buyout scenarios if you make a mistake with a hire and you need to make it go away, and you've got money coming in, and it's more than what because I think the last count was $42 million per school, but with the new agreement, it's expected to be over 50. So, but SEC and the Big Ten are operating nearly potentially as much as 80 to 100 per year per school. So it's not really in the same league, but it's also, it's also not the Mountain West or the the things like that either.
Got a handful of questions as we'll wrap up the Ask Level podcast. We'll start off with one that actually asks about this stuff. Says, Level, Do you expect the Big 12 to add any Pac-12 schools within the next 3 years?
I think they're definitely going to try. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I ultimately, here's the way I would answer that. If the Big Ten adds anybody from the Pac-12, then you almost guaranteed will add some from the Pac-12.
Mm-hmm.
If the Big Ten stays put and doesn't add anything other than USC and UCLA, I think that's a huge question mark. So because there's going to come a point in time where these Pac-12 schools that are kind of in limbo that maybe have a few options are going to go, okay, now we have to decide. Here's what this option is versus here's what this option is. What do we want to do? But I continue to hear that it's Utah and Arizona that are really more so than any others of the realistic options. Of course, you'd want Oregon and Washington, but I think of the realistic options, I think Utah and Arizona are the kind of the focus for the Big 12. Not to say that you wouldn't also look at Colorado and Arizona State too, which has been rumored, but it's been widely reported that there has been conversations with the Big 12 and those 4 schools along with Oregon and Washington.
Right.
So nobody from the Big 12 that I've ever seen has talked to Cal or Stanford or Washington State or Oregon State. Those 4 are kind of in a separate category. And of course, the Washington States and the Oregon States are hoping like crazy that the Big 10 doesn't add anybody else and they can still kind of keep some semblance of the Pac-12 together.
A Tech basketball question here from Mark. Mark asks, what do you expect your starting 5 on opening night to look like for Texas Tech?
I believe that will look something like, if Fardaws was healthy, this would alter it a bit. But sure. I would guess you're going to go with Pop Isaacs, Davion Harmon, Jalen Tyson, Kevin O'Banner, and Daniel Baccio that's my guess.
And that's pretty interesting because, and I've heard others talk about this too, but Isaacs and Harmon were both kind of looked at as ones, right? So who would be the one there?
They're both guards. Yeah. The answer is yes.
Okay, so both can be interchangeable.
Yeah, I think Pop can play off the ball. Pop's an elite passer. I think he's maybe the better shooter of the two, but Davion can get to the rim and really has got the experience. And I think if anything, you're going to be guard heavy anyway, just because this is the way your team is set up without a guy like Fardaws. Right. Because there's going to be times when Kevin O'Banner actually plays the 5. So that's what I would tell you as far as the starting 5 goes.
Hey, basketball season less than 2 weeks out. I mean, we're almost there.
Yeah, it's basically a week out. Yes.
Yeah, we're very close. A couple more, and then we'll wrap it up. This one's from Scott. Level, were you surprised to see Texas Tech kind of give up against Baylor on Saturday?
Well, I don't know if you give up per se. I just think it went sideways quickly, and it was frustrating because we have not seen that from a Joey McGuire coach team. But I think Baylor bullied them, and I think that that's Joey has talked about. I mean, again, you missed on a bunch of offensive line transfers here because you Cade Briggs, Michael Shanahan. There's some of these guys that have come in here. Ty Buchanan, they're just not ready or not going to factor in, and you missed on some of that. Defensively, you go add Miles Cole and Vital Scott and some different guys. You knew you needed more and better big people, and I think that group just kind of had their way with you. But this is why Baylor was picked where they were, because they have the best collection of big people right now in the league on both sides. Okay,
last question. Level. Who will be playing in the Big 12 championship game when all the dust settles?
Right now, I would say it's 2 purple schools.
2 purple schools. Okay.
Yeah, that's. I mean,
what a result on Saturday with Kansas State beating OSU 48-0. Who saw that coming?
And Kansas State obviously lost in Fort Worth, but they led most of that game, and they had variety of injuries, and you'd love to see that game be replayed if Adrian Martinez is the quarterback for Kansas State, and you might get to see that. So, but that as you ask me now, that's what I would tell you. I mean, Texas will have some say so there. Baylor will have some say so there. Oklahoma State certainly will have some say-so there, but I think Tech kind of missed their chance to kind of factor in to that conversation with dropping one to Baylor the way they did.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have the schedule in front of me. I think Texas and Kansas State go at it this weekend too, so that should be
Texas plays. Texas hasn't played Baylor yet. Baylor hasn't played TCU yet, but there's some head-to-head matchups here to where that's going to kind of determine which way this thing goes.
A lot of football left.
Yes.
And we'll get one on Saturday. Red Raiders and TCU, 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. And we'll do it again after that game to wrap it up. And it'd be nice to talk about the first TCU loss, but we'll see. Level, enjoyed it, man. We'll do it again.
As always, man, keep hope alive, people.
For Chris Level, I'm Chois Woodman. You've been tuned in to the Ask Level podcast, brought to you by Double T 97.3. Y'all have a great week.
You've been listening to the Ask Level podcast, powered by Double T 97.3. For more from Lubbock Sports Station, go to doublet973.com.